Chapter 2. Warning. When he reached the girl and his horse, who was grazing calmly nearby, he found her laying as he had left her, but her eyes were open. He went to her at once, and lifting her head, and made her drink some water from his canteen. She submitted, but her brown eyes glared at him defiantly. Kittering felt an uncomfortable embarrassment. What was he supposed to say to a girl who had just tried her best to shoot him off his horse? Could he say it was a nice day? Could he be a gentleman and express regret that she had missed and he hadn't? It was a situation that had him pulling leather, with a blown stirrup and the other a-going. Ma'am, he said, and gulped. Ma'am, I'm sure sorry that he had intended to say that I plugged you, but somehow it sounded a wee bit disrespectful. I didn't know that you was a lady, he concluded lamely. She still glared. I suppose, she said in a weak but defiant voice, if you knew I was a girl, you would have just let me shoot you, is that it? Well, no, that is, not exactly. I'd have hightailed it out of here and not come back and tried to get you. Then his curiosity came to the fore again. What were you shooting at me for anyway? He demanded plainly. I never done nothing to you, did I? No? Aren't you one of the Wildings men? Yes, ma'am, I've been working there for a week. And you hadn't been warned off the Short Hill Range often enough? Hadn't my father told you that any more midnight snoopers would be fired at? Wait a minute, ma'am, he interrupted. You got me throwed and hog-tied. I'd never heard any of this. Who is your father? Oh, don't play innocent, she said weakly. It doesn't become you. The best thing you can do is climb aboard your horse and get going. I can take care of myself. He shook his head soberly. No, ma'am, no you can't. Even if you don't care for my company, I'll just naturally take you home. You got an awful hole in your shoulder, and if your father don't know where you're at, you'd lay out under the sun all day. Can't tell how long it'd be before you'd find you. She made no answer. I'm not as bad as I look, he said apologetically. And if you just closed your eyes and try and bear it, we'll be home as fast as that highbinder of mine can take it without shaking you up too much. Short Hills, you said. I found a trail leading up that way. Is that yours? Yes, she whispered. What happened to your horse? He asked. Didn't you have one? She shook her head faintly. You came afoot, he marveled, looking at her with a new admiration. He got to his feet and went for the horse. When he returned, the girl was making a feeble attempt to sit up. No, don't do that, ma'am, he warned her. You'll hurt yourself if you move around. Just let me lift you up into the saddle. He bent down and lifted her first to his chest and thence to the saddle, and then, holding her supported in the crook of his right arm, he climbed up behind her. Her eyes were closed and her body limp as he took her carefully into his arms, holding her before him, with her shoulders and head resting upon his chest. Pain and nausea had seized her, and she fought off an overpowering weakness. Her drawn white face rested defenselessly against his shirt. Pat strolled along without hurry, picking his way leisurely down the butte side. And although Kittering was anxious to get her home and in bed, he was afraid that greater speed might cause a hemorrhage. The wound torn by the heavy .45 slug was an ugly and a dangerous one. They forded the creek on the far side of the butte and then followed the trail as it wound up into the foothills. The character of the country here began to change, and Kittering, who had never seen it before, was watchful and alert. The brown and gray alkali of the flats broke here and there by the green of the mesquite, the bright flower of the prickly pear blossoms, or the purple cactus flower was a colorful but a harsh, grim landscape. Here, as the land rose in gentle undulations, was running water, green grass, and the drooping leaves of willows that bended to the streams, the rustling of poplars. High up, with a scattering of oaks, and far above, he saw the dark shine of the evergreen, the pine, the spruce, and the fir. The trail climbed no more, however, and it leveled out and ran along a shallow valley through which the creek came down from the mountains. They rode slowly along the bank of the stream. Kittering glanced down at the girl, and her eyes were open, her face haggard with pain. He ventured, hoping to distract her. "What's the name of this creek, ma'am?" She flashed him a quick look of disbelief, but after a moment replied faintly, "Box Elder," and then closed her eyes. Despite the pain in her shoulder and the sickness which rushed over in waves, she was forced to admit against her prejudice that he was trying to be as gentle as possible. Riding thus slowly, they came to where the valley broadened out, and Kittering saw before him a log house with a stone chimney on the bank of the creek. The house was set just in front of the grove of elder and cottonwood tree, with the picturesque willows drooping a graceful fringe over the stream into the background. Patch's hooves sank without noise into the rich, long valley grass, but as they neared the house, the door flew open, and a figure of a man carrying a rifle was framed in the doorway. He was a big, clean-shaven man, nearing middle age, a man whose shoulders filled the doorway and whose rough overalls and shirt stained over the bulging muscles. He stood for a moment squinting at them in the bright sunlight, and then, as he made out Kittering's burden, hastily set his rifle aside and ran out to meet the horse. His eyes, as they came up, were at once questioning and threatening, their burning gaze indicating the man's fierce power even more than his strong build did. "She's all right," said Kittering to the question and the threat in the eyes. "She was just plugged through the shoulder." Without a word, the big man held out his arms, and Kittering lowered the girl into them. She smiled wanly at her father as he took her, but made no attempt to speak. Holding her high in his arms, he strode towards the doorway, and Kittering, after a moment's hesitation, dismounted and followed. He stopped in the doorway, peering into the gloom of the cabin. There was a kitchen here, with the rough log table and chairs, and through a doorway that had no door, he saw the big man lowering the girl into a bunk. He came out into the kitchen at once, seeming to not notice the puncher, and got a basin of water and returned to the other room. Kittering followed him in slowly, and stood near the window, looking out at the creek beyond the willows. In silence, the wound was dressed and bandaged, and there was something grim and hostile in the room, a tenseness that made the puncher feel the tightening web of coming events. Yet there was no speech between the father and the daughter. She lay back in her bunk with her eyes closed and her pale face, and submitted to the rough surgery. Like most frontiersmen, the man had an acquaint knowledge of first aid, and he disinfected and bandaged the wound with the skill of one of long experience. Only when he had finished did he take notice of Kittering. He straightened up from the bunk and joined the cowpuncher at the window. There was a cold, flinty hardness in his eyes, a frosty measuring light that moved far back into their depths. Again Kittering felt like a little chill, the impact of tremendous controlled force, a force that hinted an immeasurable violence held in check. Behind the surface of that granite face, a terrible anger was moving in heavy coils. But when he spoke, his voice was calm and even. "Where'd you find her?" "Why, Kittering bogged down, his own grievance forgotten in his absorption in the drama taking form in the room. The man's eyes flashed once, and when he spoke again, his voice was elaborately calm. "You didn't happen to see who did it, did you?" The question jogged Kittering back. He suddenly remembered that, after all, that he was the affronted party. It was he who had been fired upon, and he had done nothing but defend himself against an unseen assailant. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I done it." "You?" The great hands shut convulsively, and the tremendous corded muscles in the man's throat swelled as the blood rushed flaming into his face, and he took a half step forward. "Hold on." Kittering's face congealed, his hand dropping to his belt. I reckon you owe me an explanation as much as I owe you one, he said coldly. What? The other stared at him incredulously. An exclamation of what? Of what? Would you mind telling me why your daughter tried to dry gulch me? Did you ever see me before? Did I ever do anything to either of you? The other ran his eyes briefly over the puncher's long, tense body. Where are you from? He demanded curtly. Lazy Bar X. Uh-huh, he nodded grimly. Lazy Bar X, and we ain't warning Wildling that if he and any of his gun-slinging saddle bums come snooping around over here anymore for trouble, they'll get so full of lead that they won't float in Salt Lake. I suppose you didn't hear it? No, I didn't, Kittering said angrily. Seems to me you're taking a lot on yourself. I've been riding for the Lazy Bar X a week, and nobody told me nothing about keeping off the Short Hill Range. And from what I heard, I savvy that it was part of Lazy Bar X that I wasn't looking trouble for, and I ain't looking for it now, but I don't run away from it. You don't? The other was beginning when he was interrupted by a weak call from the bunk. He whirled about, went rapidly to the girl, where he remained bending over her for a few seconds. Kittering stood, watching him, thumbs hooked into his belt, breathing heavily through his nostrils. At last the big man unbent his back and turned around again. Once more his control had returned. Again his face was granite, though his eyes still smoldered. He made a gesture towards the door. All right, stranger, he said. I'm taking your word that you didn't know. You can tell Wildling that Short Hills is still plumb unhealthy for him or any of his riders, and that goes for you too, in case you're thinking of riding this way again. You savvy? Kittering moved towards the door. He gave one backward glance at the girl as he went out, but she lay still, with her eyes closed, her hair bright against the pillow. He came out into the sunshine. The father watched him silently from the doorway as he gathered up his reins and mounted the paint pony, and he remained standing in the doorway until the puncher's figure was small down the valley. End of chapter 2.